Hi there. I'm Naomi Kinsman, and I'm the Executive Director of Society of Young Inklings. Now, I started Young Inklings a very long time ago in my imagination, when I was very young, actually, because I dreamed of the opportunity to connect with the writers who wrote the books that I loved to read. And as I grew and developed as a writer myself, I just wanted the opportunity to connect with those authors and learn from them and grow as a writer by having those meaningful conversations around the craft of writing. And that's why at Society of Young Inklings, we create opportunities for youth writers to connect with authors and illustrators and other storytelling pros, because we know how meaningful it can be for youth to have the opportunity to connect with pros who are doing the work of telling stories for a living, or at least for part of their living. So today we are going to focus on a really important skill in storytelling, which is figuring out how to show rather than tell. Now, everybody who's ever written a story and turned it in has probably heard somebody say, oh, you should show rather than tell. However, it can be a little bit confusing to know what exactly that means. And it is a nuanced concept, specifically because not every single moment needs to be shown in moment-to-moment detail. In fact, sometimes if we show every single thing, like say I show you moment-to-moment detail of brushing my teeth, that's going to be a pretty boring scene, especially if there's no purpose for that scene. So we're going to talk today about some ways to think through whether a scene is appropriate, whether a summary is appropriate, and how to work between the two. And in typical Inkling style, we're going to play some games to figure this out. So we're going to start with a character. I'm going to start with Inky the Bookworm. So what I'd like for you to do is just grab a piece of paper. It can be a blank piece of paper, or if you printed our printable, it could be on the back. And I'd like for you to think about this character, Inky the Bookworm, and think about 3 things that he, or if you want it to be she, might do in an everyday experience. So some daily activities for Inky the Bookworm. I'm going to write some down too, so I'm going to give you a second to think about this. Let's see. All right, I'm on number 2 right now. Hopefully you're writing some down too. All right, so what I wrote down is getting ready in the morning. So Inky getting ready in the morning. I also wrote down eating breakfast, and then I wrote down going to the library to work, because I'm going to have Inky's job be at a library, and hopefully Inky is actually taking care of the books rather than eating through them, but we don't know. We'll have to figure that out. So let's say that we wanted to introduce Inky, this character. And one of the things that I find when I'm starting my own stories, or when I work with children or youth writers who are starting stories, a really tempting thing to do is to start with a character getting ready in the morning, because we feel like, okay, so they've woken up and this is a natural beginning for this character. And when they're getting ready in the morning, we get to see, what do they eat for breakfast? How do they wash their face? Do they have any specific habits? What do they wear? All of those things that we need to know about these characters. So often when we're starting a story, we might start with some of those details. So let's say that we wanted to write a scene about Inky getting ready in the morning. If we were to write that scene, I could see us kind of getting bogged down in the details. So Inky might stretch one way and another, and then scoot or inch her way out of bed, and then she might go over to her little thimble sink, and she might kind of splash her head around in the water, and she might go outside her little tree house, if that's where she lives, and she might take in some sun and nibble on a leaf to have some breakfast. Now, if I was to tell this in moment-to-moment detail, they're fun details maybe, but they might be a little bit boring, and we're not really getting very far with our story, and the reader eventually is probably going to put this book down because it's just not that interesting. However, even in telling you those few details about Inky the bookworm, I learned that she possibly lives in a treehouse. Maybe she's pretty aware of being clean. She might be a tidy little Inky, a tidy little bookworm, and she might have a little sweet tooth for the most sweet or fresh green leaves. So I've learned a couple things about her. Now, I'm not sure that any of those are really the most important thing about Inky the bookworm, I think what we want to know are what are her strengths and what are her weaknesses. So she lives in a treehouse. What if I gave her a fear of heights? Now, I'd have to figure out why in the world she decided to live in a treehouse if that was the case. Or I could give her, a huge confidence about heights. And then I could think about, okay, so what might be a weakness for her? Maybe she is always hungry and she's always eating everything. Maybe she's always eating leaves, and that makes it so that when she goes to her job taking care of the books, maybe she's supposed to eat through books for some reason. Maybe she's supposed to eat the new characters that sneak into the stories. So maybe sometimes when books are closed, sneaky villain characters come into the books and they start to change the storyline. And if that were the case, maybe Inky would need to go through and eat the pages that were having that happen on them. And if she was always full of sweet green leaves, maybe she wouldn't be able to do her job very well. So now I'm starting to have some interesting details about Inky. And instead of starting with her in this moment where she's waking up, washing her face, going out and eating a leaf, maybe I think of a way to really show this sort of full tummy that she has. Or if I do tell that scene where she wakes up in the morning, I really focus on the important thing. And what is that? Well, she's filling up on those sweet green leaves, right? And so if I was going to try to write this scene and really make it important, I would want to make sure that I was focusing in on that heart of the scene, which is how delicious those green leaves are and how she eats and eats and eats and then realizes, uh-oh, I have to go to work. My tummy is full. What am I going to do? And then the next scene might be her inching her way along to work and feeling terrible and wondering what kind of excuses she's going to make today. Maybe she'd even be inventing excuses, and I would learn that not only is Inky someone who maybe eats too many sweet green leaves, but also she invents wild stories to get herself out of trouble, both of which might get her into more trouble as the story goes along. So all of that, you can see, I took a moment where I'm getting to know my character, and I thought about what comes to mind first, right? And I didn't tell myself no. I didn't say, no, she can't get up in the morning. I can't do that scene because it's boring. Instead of putting up that brick wall for myself, I just allowed myself to think about what would that scene look like. And through that exploration, I started to notice some details that I wanted to make the most of. And then I thought about how can I expand that into a scene? Now, let's look at the flip side of this. Let's say I didn't really have a great way to make this into a scene, and maybe it's not even the first scene of my story. Maybe what I need to do is I need to get Inky halfway through the story. I need to have Inky leave her library and go to a library in Paris because I want to have an adventure in Paris. If that's the case, if I have Inky go back to her house and she packs her suitcase, and she spends a long time getting ready for her flight and getting to, maybe she's flying on the back of a bird. Maybe if I took a really long time to get her there and get her on the back of the bird and have her flying and detailing all of the things that she sees in sort of really descriptive detail, while that flight might be really beautiful, it sort of derails my story because what I really need is to get her to Paris. So maybe what I do then is add some interesting details, but I do it in summary. So I don't tell each moment-to-moment thing. I just describe, Inky flew over the tops of church spires, and she felt the icy sea wind or icy salty air hit her cheeks as she flew over the ocean and headed to Paris, right? So I just give a couple little details, enough that you can see it in your mind, but I make it not a whole scene. So we have to decide. The first decision we need to make is, are we going to make it a scene, and are we going to make it a summary? And a lot of that has to do with how important that scene is. And that brings us to this Take 3 page that we have. So this page helps us to look at a scene and to think about what is the main purpose of this scene. So at this point, I've come up with this waking up in the morning scene to get to know Inky. And I thought, so the main purpose of my scene in this case is to figure out, to show the reader how much, and I'm just writing this down, to show the reader how much Inky loves green leaves. Okay, so she loves these green leaves, and I also want to show how that gets her into trouble. Okay, so the idea with this page is to now take my idea and see if I can make it a little bit more interesting. So I know that this is the heart of the scene, and the first thing that came to mind was she's waking up in the morning, she goes out of her treehouse window, and she has her leaves, which is one way to do it. And it does tell you where she lives. It gives you a little sense of who she is as a character. So that might be idea one, is waking up in the morning and getting ready and eating. But idea two, now I'm stretching myself to think, okay, where else might Inky go and eat these green leaves? Could she eat them on her walk to work? She absolutely could. Or could it be on her lunch break? She leaves the library and she goes outside. Maybe she was really good today and she got to the library without having eaten all the green leaves. But through, her work, through the day, she's just dreaming of green leaves, and then she goes outside and she's really trying hard to be good, but she has these green leaves. Or maybe I said it, maybe she goes to a farmer's market. For some reason, there's a farmer's market in town this day, and so she goes through and she's smelling all of these wonderful things, and that's where she gets in trouble. So maybe idea two might be the farmer's market, and idea three might be I might decide to have it be that lunch break moment. So I would maybe draw those on this page, or I might write some details about them and maybe some bullet points. And that gives me a chance to think about, okay, so would I rather have my reader see this problem for Inky at her house, or at the farmer's market, or at her job? And I can see reasons for all three of them. But what I would do then is I would weigh my options. Now, on this page, you have the opportunity to create two scenes. You can always print this out again and do other scenes. The thing that I really want you to notice here with this thinking that we're doing is that a lot of times writers need to start right where they are. You don't necessarily need to have the perfect idea to start. And in fact, it's really helpful, instead of just having the idea and immediately going down to write, to actually have the idea and then to process through it, to play it out in your mind like a movie. Because if you do that, you can see, we've been talking for about 11 minutes right now. I've gone through three possible options. If I were to have written out those three scenes, it would have taken me at least an hour. But because I did it quickly like that, inside of my mind, I was able to see, what are the pros and cons of these, and I could now make a decision. However, often what I will do, in addition to this kind of work, is I will actually stand up. And I'm going to stand up right now so I can show you what I might do. So let's see if I can stand up and you can see me. Great, here we go. So I might stand up and I might decide, okay, so I'm going to think about the beginning of my scene, the middle of my scene, and the end of my scene, because that's a really quick and easy way to just play out a scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about, okay, so the beginning of Inky's scene is Inky stretching in the morning in her home. And then the middle of her scene is she spies out her window the sweet green leaves. And the end might be, oh, her tummy ache because she ate way too many, right? Okay. So then I can take that and I can expand it. So one of the games we play at Young Inklings is called Halftime. So what we're doing is we're breaking this into slower parts. So in the beginning, I had the stretch. What if I broke that beginning moment into three parts? So it had a beginning, middle, and end. So she stretches, she inches out of bed, and then she washes her face, okay? And then she gets an idea. She goes over to the window and peeks out, and then she starts to eat the leaves, okay? And then, beginning, middle, and end of the end, she's so busy eating that suddenly she realizes, oh, she has a stomach ache, and then she remembers she has to go to work. Okay, so now I've broken those down, and I could continue to do that to build these all together until I can string them together like a little scene. Then I could do the same thing with my other stories, with my other scenes, and by acting them out, I could kind of get a sense in my body about which one of them is helping us to know Inky, this bookworm, the best. Now, I would love, if you're watching right now, for you to tell us what you think you would want most. Do you like the scene where Inky is waking up in the morning in her treehouse, or do you prefer the scene where Inky is going to the farmer's market and having that really sensory experience? Or do you prefer the scene where Inky is going to work and she is, having that experience there? If you have an idea, if you have a preference, I would love for you to share. And even if you're watching this after it's live, you can put that in the comment section below, because we would love to know which one of those scenes that you like best. And in fact, I would like to invite you, if you would like, to write one of those scenes for us, and you can even submit it to us at Young Inklings. If you head over to younginklings.org, you can see our contact information, and you can just send us a quick little email and tell us what you share the scene that you come up with us. We'd love to see it. Or if it's a short scene, you can post it in the comments below. What I want you to take away from today are a couple things. The first is, of course, I want you to take away this printable because it's a really good planning tool, and it's a great opportunity to think about, how can I get to the heart of the scene? How can I figure out what's really important and then tell the scene in the best possible way? I also want you to take away this idea of, should it be a scene or should it be a summary? And if it's a summary, it doesn't have to be boring. It can have some really interesting details that create pictures in our mind, but it's condensed. It doesn't tell us every single second of the scene. It just gives us a quick little glimmer of what happened, and then we're on, like in this case, we're on to Paris, right? So you have to make those two decisions. And the final thing that I want for you to take away from today is to think about how the first idea that you have for telling a moment in a character's life, whether it's introducing your character or introducing a villain or introducing a conflict or introducing a subplot or carrying the problem forward or having your character react to something, no matter what it is, the first idea that you have for that scene, the first setting that it shows up in your imagination, may not be the very best one. And you may find a way even to collapse two ideas together. So you know that you want to show the library where Inky the bookworm works, and you also know that you want to introduce the villain, for instance. So why not collapse those two into the same scene and make those two things happen together? So we don't just have a scene that's all about setting up something, but we also include that exciting introduction of a villain in the same scene. Of course, you want to take some time to do both, but you really just want to think about, how can I be strategic about that? And the final PS on this is, keep in mind that strategizing a little before you write is a really great way to make sure that your writing time, you make the most of your writing time. You don't want to spend all of your writing time writing things out in longhand and then discover later that you actually want to toss that scene out. Playing it out, whether you act it out or draw it out or write it out in quick little bullet points, gives you the chance to take a look at it and decide, is this working or do I want to go a different direction? So that's a ton of different options for you. I hope that you have a lot of fun as you play with your scenes. If you are preparing your manuscript for our Inklings Book Contest, you likely know that our deadline for contest submission is this week. It's on the 15th. So make sure that you send in your story, and if you're still playing around with it, think about how this idea of scene and summary plays into your story if you're writing a story. And if you're writing a poem, think about whether you want to really expand a moment into a scene in your poem, or if you want to make it a summary, or your poem may not have any narrative quality at all. It might just be about a single moment of time, which is fine too, or it might be about a feeling, or an experience, or even a flavor or a sound. So we hope that you take the opportunity this week to submit. Even if you haven't RSVP'd, you can still submit your work. If you want more details on that, head over to younginklings.org and look at our blog. You'll be able to find some details about how to submit. And there's lots of information over there. You can also join Young Inklings as a member, and we would love to have you. So thanks so much for being with us today. We are so grateful for your creativity, and we hope you had fun playing with us. And we will be back next week talking more about some tricks and tips for young writers. See you soon. Bye-bye.